So my name is Mark Stoddard. I'm with the Indiana Department of Environmental Management. I'm one of the technical subcommittee co-chairs. Leanne Briggs with Pennsylvania might be on a little later. I think she was in a meeting. So I'm very happy to introduce Jodie Opie. I was attending a wastewater conference back in April. I heard only part of her presentation, but I thought, wow, that what little I did hear, I thought was good, and I thought it would be worthwhile if that she would be able to share this with our group. So Jodie serves as an environmental engineer for the EPA Region 5 Water Division, reviewing state NPDES permits. For those not familiar with water acronyms, National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. This is for wastewater treatment plants. She's done this since 2008. She also serves as the Industrial Pretreatment Coordinator, contact for permits branch, and is the wastewater security lead for the water division. So I can't emphasize enough with the industrial pretreatment, metal finishing being one of those. Not only do you have air impacts, but you have water and waste impacts. And from the standpoint of wastewater going into the sanitary sewer, which is your pre-treatment, that can have some significant impacts on your local POTW in terms of interference and pass-through. So with that being said, Jodie, take it away.
Hello, everyone. I'm glad to be here and glad to give you some information on PFAS. So today I'm going to talk about our national PFAS efforts, and then I'm going to get into key roadmap progress, and then talk about some upcoming actions. And I'm going to talk about a couple of memos that came out last year regarding how we're going to permit PFAS in NPDES permits. And then I will get into the effluent limit guideline rulemakings that are have to do with PFAS. So yeah, some of you have already heard some of this information, but we'll just go over it again. So as background, in April of 2021, the EPA Administrator Regan established the EPA Council on PFAS and charged it to develop a bold, strategic, whole approach to protect public health and the environment from the impacts of PFAS. Because really, there's no other way to do it. You know, you can't just do water and you can't just do air. We have to do all media. So the council is comprised of senior technical and policy leaders from across EPA program offices, including our Region 5 Water Division Director, Tara Fong. The council met the administrator's call through the development of the PFAS strategic roadmap that was released in October of 2021. And the roadmap does several things. It includes clear timelines for concrete actions through 2024. It fills a critical gap in federal leadership, and it supports states' ongoing efforts to tackle PFAS. Because I'm sure, as many of you know, some of our states are far ahead on PFAS, while others are just beginning their PFAS efforts. And it builds on EPA's commitment to restore the scientific integrity by making science the foundation of our work with PFAS. So there are many ways in which PFAS can get into the environment. So EPA's approach dealing with the complexity of this life cycle is centered around 5 principles. First, we're considering the life cycle of PFAS, including the very unique properties of PFAS and their uses and the multiple pathways for exposure. Second, we're getting upstream of the problem. Preventing PFAS from entering the environment in the first place is very, very important, because if it doesn't enter the environment, you know, we don't have to have efforts to eliminate it from the environment. Third, we're holding polluters accountable for their actions and for PFAS remediation efforts. And then fourth, we're ensuring a science-based decision-making. EPA is investing in scientific research to fill the gaps in the understanding of PFAS. And then fifth, we're prioritizing protection for disadvantaged communities. So there is a lot of text on this slide, but the main message here is that our integrated approach to PFAS is focused on 3 goals, and that is research, restrict, and remediate. We're investing in that research. We're working on a comprehensive approach to prevent PFAS from entering the environment. And then we're going to broaden and accelerate the cleanup of PFAS contamination. So here is a list of some of our key accomplishments from October 2021 to the present. So we proposed a national primary drinking water regulation for 6 PFAS compounds. We've taken action to restrict PFAS discharges to waterways. We've proposed to designate 2 PFAS as hazardous substances under CERCLA, or the Superfund regulation. We've begun distributing $10 billion in funding to address emerging contaminants under the bipartisan infrastructure law. We've laid the foundation for enhancing data on PFAS, such as issuing 2 test orders under EPA's National PFAS Testing Strategy, which requires companies to conduct PFAS testing. We've expanded the scientific understanding of PFAS and translated this science into EPA's efforts. And this includes issuing more than 30 scientific publications, releasing EPA's PFAS thermal treatment database, and issuing risk assessments, just to name a few. We've proactively used enforcement tools to identify and address PFAS releases. We've issued enforcement actions against the 3M facility in Cordova, Illinois, and against Chemours DuPont facility in West Virginia, that is right next to Ohio. And we've also developed a really invaluable tool, and I hope some of you can check it out on our EPA ECHO website. It's called the PFAS Analytical Tool, and I'll have some screenshots of that tool a little later on in the presentation. And it is there is a public version, so it's available for anyone in the public to get on there and look at where PFAS might be in your community. And then finally, we've engaged with federal partners and the public through public webinars, stakeholder meetings, congressional testimony, as well as a series of virtual listening sessions we held in each region and for the tribes earlier this year. So some key upcoming actions include we released a proposed rule to regulate 6 PFAS chemicals in drinking water back in March of this year. We've accepted those public comments on the proposed rule through May 30th, and we received over 120,000 comments. And we have multiple people very busy now reviewing those comments, and we plan to finalize the rule by the end of 2023. Through our 5th cycle of the unregulated contaminated monitoring rule, EPA is currently requiring public water systems nationwide to test drinking water for 29 PFAS chemicals starting this year through 2025. And there's also a drinking water mapping tool that I'll talk about in some future slides. We are also working to develop a national technology-based discharge limits for industries that use PFAS through our Effluent Limitations Guideline program plan. In January of 2023, we released the final Effluent Limit Guideline Plan 15, which outlines key steps toward addressing PFAS discharges across a couple of different industrial categories. And I will talk about that in more detail soon. We're also working to address PFAS in NPDES permits and through improved analytical methods. In April of 2022, we released a draft aquatic life water quality criteria for public comment for PFOA and PFAS. And we look forward to finalizing these criteria in the coming weeks. So that's coming up very, very soon. We're also working to enhance the data availability on PFAS in fish tissue to help states and tribes to set PFAS fish advisories. And finally, we're working to evaluate the risks of PFAS in biosolids. And we'll be finalizing a risk assessment for PFAS and PFOA by 2024. That will serve as a basis for determining whether regulation of these two chemicals in biosolids is appropriate. So this slide lists several key activities under our remediation and air programs. As mentioned earlier, EPA proposed the CERCLA hazardous substance rule and currently reviewing the public comments on that proposed rule with plans to finalize it in early 2024. And as an additional step, this past April, EPA published an advanced notice of proposed rulemaking that seeks public comments on designating other of the PFAS chemicals as CERCLA hazardous substances. The comment period on this notice is open until August 11th. So if you think you might have comments on that, get them in before August 11th. And at the same time, EPA continues to work closely with stakeholders to better understand and address equity concerns. As you have likely heard, there are concerns from some stakeholders that they might be held liable for PFAS contamination. They are not the manufacturers of PFAS, but instead the receivers of PFAS, such as wastewater treatment plants or farmers that had received biosolids on their fields. In early 2023, EPA's Office of Enforcement and Compliance Assistance held 2 public listening sessions to inform development of a CERCLA PFAS enforcement discretion and settlement policy. Under RCRA, EPA plans to propose 2 regulations soon, sometime this year. One is a proposal to add specific PFAS to the list of hazardous constituents, which would mean these PFAS are subject to RCRA corrective actions. And the other is a proposal to clarify that emerging contaminants such as PFAS can be cleaned up through the RCRA process. These 2 proposed rules are currently at our Office of Management and Budget for interagency review. For the third item on this slide, EPA will be updating our guidance on PFAS destruction and disposal. We published an interim guidance in December of 2020. In that document, we highlighted significant uncertainties about effectiveness of some PFAS destruction and disposal technologies. And we have a deadline to update this guidance by December of 2023. And just as an aside, the Department of Defense did just issue a report on destruction and disposal technologies just the other day. I haven't had a chance to read that one yet, but I'm sure it will help inform our guidance. And lastly, the Office of Air and Radiation is working to identify sources to support future decisions on whether to designate PFAS as hazardous air pollutants under the Clean Air Act. As talked about earlier, science and research are the foundation of EPA's work on PFAS. EPA is working to improve the scientific understanding of PFAS in 3 primary areas. Researchers are working to develop and validate additional methods to detect and measure PFAS in the environment. They're working to advance the science to assess human health and environmental risk from PFAS, and working to evaluate and develop technologies for reducing PFAS in the environment. So lastly, under EPA's Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention, they're working on many actions to restrict PFAS. EPA recognizes that we need to go beyond regulating PFAS on a chemical by chemical basis. So we're looking at PFAS through the lens of categories and deepening our understanding of categories through the National PFAS Testing Strategy. By breaking PFAS into distinct categories, information can be used to direct research, amplify regulatory action, accelerate technology and policy solutions to restrict and remediate PFAS. Second, EPA is working under the TSCA authorities to strengthen its oversight over both new and existing PFAS. As an example, in mid-May, EPA released a proposed rule that would strengthen our review process for new chemicals. And earlier this year, EPA proposed a rule that would ensure that any discontinued use of certain PFAS couldn't re-enter the marketplace without review. Third, EPA is collecting data and improving reporting on how PFAS are used and released. As an example, we're working on the TSCA final rule to better characterize the sources and quantities of manufactured PFAS in the US. And under the Toxis release inventory, we are working to enhance PFAS reporting by proposing a rule to remove exemptions and exclusions from reporting. And fourth, we're working to reduce the presence of PFAS in products purchased by the federal government. So I'm sure you've all heard about the bipartisan infrastructure law that was passed. Bill, we call it, provides the single largest investment in clean water that the federal government has ever made. The bill will build on the research restrictions and remediation called for in the PFAS roadmap by providing $10 billion for communities impacted by PFAS and other emerging contaminants. Bill builds on EPA's existing water finance programs, the state revolving fund finance programs. Of the $10 billion, $4 billion is allotted to the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. $1 billion is to the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, and then $5 billion will provide grants to address emergency. Now we'll move on to some updates on PFAS and the contaminants of concern, incorporating PFAS into the NPDES permit program and the effluent limit guidelines. So as I talked about previously, we have our roadmap that was issued in October of 2021. And within that roadmap, it does talk about leveraging the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, the NPDES permitting program to reduce PFAS discharges to waterways by reducing discharges of PFAS at the source. It discusses restricting PFAS discharges from industrial sources through multifaceted the Effluent Limit Guideline Program Plan and requirements in NPDES permits. It discussed publishing improved analytical methods for PFAS and to finalize a risk assessment for PFOA and PFAS and biosolids. So a little bit on some of the draft methods that are out there that could be included in an NPDES permit. I believe we're on the third round of the draft method 1633, and that's for analysis of PFAS in aqueous, solid, biosolids, and tissue samples. This third draft was announced in December of 2022. It incorporates the final QC acceptance criteria for all matrices. And that was derived from the multi-lab validation study. Previous to this, it was only single lab validated. Well, this third round is now multi-lab validated. it will be used for 40 PFAS compounds. And then, like I said, it'll be included in some NPDES permits. And it has been tested in a wide variety of wastewaters, and it contains all the required quality control elements in a Clean Water Act method. Even though it's not final, we are recommending the use of it now in permits. So anticipated in 2023 is the final version of method 1633. I haven't heard any latest information yet, but it's still anticipated final for 2023. So draft method 1621, right now it's only completed a single laboratory validation. And this is more of a, I guess you could call it a screening method. It doesn't tell the user which compounds are present, but it will tell you that PFAS is there, but it won't identify the exact compounds. So it's more for screening of PFAS compounds. So we do have a draft aquatic life and fish tissue criteria for PFAS and PFOA. That was published, the draft was published in May 3rd of 2022. The public comment period ended July 5th of 2022. We hope to have this one out soon. And again, here's the numbers for the aquatic life criteria. And once we have this criteria finalized, states will be able to set water quality standards based on this criteria. So on April 28th of 2022, EPA headquarters issued a memorandum entitled Addressing PFAS Discharges, and EPA issued NPDES permits and expectations where EPA is the Pretreatment Control Authority. So this memo didn't really directly impact states yet. This is more for EPA issued permits, any federally issued permits. I believe in Region 5, we only issue permits to tribal communities. And then the other part of this memo was where EPA is the control authority in pretreatment programs. In Region 5 of the 6 states, 2 of our states do not have the authority to implement a pretreatment program, that being Illinois and Indiana. So in those 2 states, EPA is considered the control authority over industrial users. So the April memo spoke of specific industries that have a high probability of containing industries that might discharge PFAS. And those include the organic chemicals, plastic and synthetic fibers guideline, the metal finishing and electroplating, electric and electronic components, landfills, pulp, paper and paperboard, leather tanning and finishing, plastics molding and forming, textiles, paint formulation, and airports. So on December 5th of 2022, EPA issued a memorandum entitled Addressing PFAS Discharges and NPDES Permits and Through the Pretreatment Program and Monitoring Programs. So this memorandum addresses state-issued NPDES permits, as well as through the pretreatment program. And again, Illinois and Indiana in Region 5 do not have the authority to implement a pretreatment program. So EPA is the approval authority over pretreatment programs in the state. So we are working with those states to get language into the NPDES permits of approved pretreatment program POTWs regarding PFAS. So this December 5th memo lays out recommended PFAS permitting conditions. So some of the conditions that you might see in an NPDES permit surrounding monitoring and reporting of PFAS. There could be effluent monitoring for industrial permits. There could be effluent biosolids monitoring included in POTW permits. And that monitoring would be quarterly monitoring for 40 PFAS constituents using the analytical method 1633. And then, that data can be electronically reported via DMRs as other data currently is. You might see best management practices contained in an NPDES permit as a special condition. Some of those practices are to look and see what products contain PFAS, eliminate those products, or substitute those products for a product that does not contain PFAS. Some other requirements are accidental discharge minimization, decontaminating equipment or replacing the equipment. I know in some POTWs, we've seen legacy PFAS in some of the piping. There is a new fact sheet. It just came out just the other day for industrial discharges. And this is a fact sheet laying out all the best management practices that, that would be seen in an industrial NPDES permit that just came out, but there's a link to it there. And then another big requirement in NPDES permitting is public notice for draft permits that downstream public water systems with intakes in the same water body that the POTW might be discharging to, that those facilities should receive a public notice of a permit that contains conditions surrounding PFAS. And then again, I'll be talking about this in a next few slides, but EPA has a drinking water mapping application tool that, it's a helpful tool to screen to identify potentially affected public water systems that should be public noticed. So after this December 5th memo was out, we began having talks with the states where we are the pretreatment program approval or control authority, that Illinois and Indiana. We have shared example permit language with them, as an example to control PFAS, to eliminate PFAS discharges from industries and from the POTW discharges. We also provided all of our states here in Region 5, all 6 states, with a state-specific list of direct discharging industrial facilities based on the ISIS polls that we did using the same SIC codes that were in that list of industries I talked about a little bit earlier. So this is our EPA PFAS analytical tool, and all of the data that makes up this tool is from public sources. It's from ISIS, it's from TRI, so it's from all these other already existing databases out there, and we've pulled all that information together to make this PFAS analytical tool. And this is just a screenshot within the analytical tool of potential PFAS sources in our Region 5. So you can see a lot of different dots, and these dots represent, they could just represent an industry that's within the SIC code category where a potential PFAS discharge might happen. So this is like the integrated map with all of the other data in there. There's the drinking water map of drinking water plants that have sampled their drinking water and may have a hit of PFAS. There's the production, those that produce PFAS. There's discharge monitoring report data that's gathered in here. If there are permits out there that already have PFAS monitoring in there, and that is within their discharge monitoring reports, that data is pulled in here. There's data from the Superfund sites, other federal sites, again, the industry sectors, if there's been any spills, and then again, the toxic release inventory. So if you haven't gotten into this tool and played around with it a little bit, it's a very, very good tool. I encourage you to get in there and look at it. So EPA's drinking water mapping application tool that's used to protect source waters. Again, that might be a helpful screening tool to identify potentially PFAS affected public water systems. So it's an online tool. It can identify potential sources of contamination and the location identified by whomever's using the tool. It can find data to support source water assessments, and it can help emergency response sources evaluate where accidental spills and releases are. And there's the EPA drinking water mapping tool, the user guide, and then a link to the tool. And onto effluent limitation guidelines planning. Just a little bit of background for those that might not know it, but in 1987, there was a Clean Water Act amendment that added Section 304M to the Act, and this was reinforced Congress's intent to that effluent guidelines, they keep pace with pollution prevention and treatment technologies. So we have to review all the promulgated effluent guidelines annually. We publish a plan every other year after proposal and public comment for the guidelines that it will establish a schedule for any effluent guidelines revisions that have been identified through our review, and it identifies any industries that might not currently be subject to an effluent guideline that discharge, amounts of toxics, and it might establish a timeline for us to review that industry sector, and then a schedule to take any action that might be needed to control those toxic discharges. So as I stated earlier, January 31st of this year, the final ELG Program Plan 15 came out. It has a big focus on assessing opportunities to limit PFAS discharges from multiple industry categories. So some of the category reviews that we looked at: metal products and machinery, explosives, canned and preserved seafood, sugar processing, soap and detergent manufacturing. And, we reviewed those. We found that, the limitations are within range. They're consistent with discharges from treatment technology practices. So there'll be no further revisions on those categories. We did initiate a review of landfills based on public comments received on the previous Program Plan 14 that identified landfill leachate as a source of PFAS. Some of the rulemakings that are discussed in Program Plan 15 include the organic chemicals, plastics, and synthetic fibers category. So after we did our multi-industry PFAS study, we are now preparing a rulemaking to revise this regulation that will address PFAS discharges from facilities that manufacture PFAS. In our data, we've determined that there are 12 facilities across the U.S. from 5 different companies that meet the manufacturing of PFAS. We are not, under this rulemaking, going to look at other industries under this category that might process PFAS. That may come in the future. But right now, it is strictly the manufacturers of PFAS. One of the manufacturers, 3M, has announced that they're going to discontinue manufacturing PFAS in 2025. In Region 5, in our 6 states, we have 2 manufacturers. One is 3M Cottage Grove in Minnesota, and the other is 3M Cordova in Illinois. So we expect in 2025 that those facilities will discontinue manufacturing. So this rule, right now we are getting further along. We are at the point of option selections for treatment technologies on this proposed rulemaking. And we still intend to publish a proposed rule in May of 2024. The other rulemaking is for metal finishing and electroplating. So we are preparing a rulemaking to revise this regulation. And again, it's going to be specific, not an overall revision to this regulation. It's going to be specific to metal finishers and electroplating facilities that have used in the past or are currently using hexavalent chromium in their processing. And we intend to publish a proposed rule in the summer of 2024. And right now I know that they're evaluating a whole lot of data that has come in from questionnaires and through site visits. And all of that data will help to inform this rulemaking. And again, we plan to publish a proposed rule in the summer of 2024. Some of the other data reviews that we've done under Program Plan 15 are the plastics molding and forming, the paint formulating, and leather tanning. Once that data review is complete, then we'll decide if we have sufficient data to make a determination that a potential rulemaking is needed. And if we don't, we'll further review it until we can make that determination if there should be a rulemaking or not to address any PFAS discharges. So landfills and textile mills, we have determined that revisions to the guidelines for landfills are warranted. That is in very, very, very early stages. Textile mills, that study is going to be expanded to gather more information on the use and treatment of PFAS in this industry. So we'll continue studying that one. And we will continue to monitor reduction of PFAS use and discharge by the pulp and paper facilities and commercial airports. Even though we haven't taken an action in those 2 categories right now, the Food and Drug Administration has for food packaging. They've banned the use of PFAS in food packaging, and then the Federal Aviation Administration has made commercial airports switch from a PFAS containing fire foam to one that does not contain PFAS. All All right, that's the end of my presentation. Are there any questions?
So while we're waiting on questions, the last point that you raised regarding airports, did EPA have to partner with the Federal Aviation Administration? I know there was some issue about finding a suitable alternative as far as a foam. And yeah, so I don't know if that means not using certain PFAS or it means not using all PFAS, and whether, again, it was a coordinated effort with FAA.
I'm not sure if it was a coordinated effort or not.
So anyone who has a question, either put it in the chat area or unmute and ask Jodie. And while we're waiting, can you touch a little bit on this questionnaire and I guess what its purpose is and when it might be final?
The questionnaire for metal finishing?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not sure when it will be final, but that questionnaire is to help identify those metal finishers that might discharge PFAS. Like I said, the rulemaking is just a subset of metal finishers. So it's just to further learn if maybe other subsets of metal finishers might discharge PFAS as well. But we know for sure the ones that have used or are using hexavalent chromium do have those discharges.
Right, based on legacy usage.
Yes.
So Renee Beschel posted in the chat box, is it known yet how the cost of the PFAS effluent lab testing compared to the usual testing experienced by industrial dischargers?
As far as any particular category or?
Well, I guess I'm thinking how the lab test might compare versus, say, like BOD, suspended solids, COD, ammonia, or maybe specific organic chemicals. I don't know, with the PFAS being maybe more involved because now you're testing to a, was it parts per trillion? Whether that would inflate the price of testing?
Yes, I don't know much about the costs of the test, but I could find that answer for you.
Yes, and I think going to the drinking water, I think there were like 6 labs in the US that were doing this 2-year drinking water sampling and analysis. So I presume there's probably more than 6 labs in the US that, can do this type of testing, possibly for samples for effluent limitations.
Right. Lab capacity is going to be critical to this PFAS effort going forward, especially when NPDES permits have those requirements, those testing, monitoring and testing requirements within those permits. So lab capacity is going to be critical across the nation for that.
Will there be any, I don't recall if there's a certification process to be able to be to serve as a lab for a given discharger?
I'm not sure about lab certification processes, but this method will be contained within the 40 CFR 136 Clean Water Act methods. And I imagine if a lab is certified for that, they should be okay. I don't know. I'm not the expert on lab certification. So.
Yeah, I'm not by far. Hey, anyone who wants to ask a question, either unmute or post it as a chat like Renee. Now, while we wait, and again, I can't say a lot enough about the PFAS in the metal plating and finishing industry, posted or published by the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. I don't recall the lady's name, but she's going to be presenting to our group in September. But within it, they give an overview, and apparently the replacement for PFOS is 6:2 fluorotelomere sulfonic acid. So I'm wondering, are eventually companies that have used those alternative PFAS in lieu of PFOS, will they be restricted on those alternatives?
That remains to be seen.
Because I know another example of an alternative is tridecafluorooctane sulfonic acid, which actually reminds me of an issue with Michigan. The air inspector was trying to obtain information for the wetting agents that were being used for their chrome plating operation. And they had a hard time getting information as it was proprietary information. So is there anything that can be done to kind of make that, information available, even if it's kept confidential?
That I don't know. Confidential business information is, it's just that, it's confidential.
Right. Yeah. So if you're not using, if you're looking at PFAS in general, getting out of one, which is maybe more toxic like PFAS, but jumping into another one. So if you're jumping from the pan into the fire,
right.
I don't recall whether the metal finishing effluent limits are going to be changing as far as any of the metals.
We realize that there are other revisions that might be needed within the metal finishing category, but the focus is on PFAS.
Okay.
Yeah. And just those that discharge PFAS. So it's just, a subset of this category.
So I know there's a National Association for Surface Finishing. Are they partnering with EPA to kind of go through this rulemaking process?
I have not heard that they have, that we've partnered with them. We are, we've gathered the data, we've done site visits, we're working on analyzing all that right now. When we have a proposed rule, they would definitely be welcome to comment on it. As far as partnering, I have not heard that has occurred or will occur.
I know with us as small business environmental assistance providers, and we vary a lot. Sometimes I say jack of all trades, master of none. We can be found in the state regulatory agency or Department of Commerce or university or some other part of a state government or non-state government. But we look for tools or maybe checklist or things that we can either put on a website or provide to people to kind of help them navigate what the rule means to them. What do they have to start doing, or what do they have to prepare for? And so I don't know if you have anything like that where you're going to be providing or putting together compliance assistance tools that might be a benefit to people who might be impacted by the changes to the effluent limitation guidelines for these particular categorical standards.
I do encourage you to look at the PFAS Best Management Practice Fact Sheet. There's a link in one of my slides about that. That just came out, and that is for industry. On top of that, I can find out information on any small business initiatives that we might have within EPA for, to help small businesses with these new guidelines. I mean, there's something sticking in the back of my head about that. We could have something, and I can double check that.
Okay, thank you. Well, I hate to be hogging your time. I'm certain it would seem like someone has bound to have a question, and I don't want to interfere with someone who might want to talk to you by unmuting or by chatting.
I see that question, the plans for sludge management. Again, we are still evaluating biosolids, and we had a, let's see. So we are finalizing the risk assessment for PFOA and PFAS for biosolids, and we hope to have that done by 2024. So then we'll know more about biosolids. I know that is a really big hot topic for so many, for the POTWs, for the farm fields where the biosolids are spread. So it's a very big hot topic. So by 2024, we should have those risk assessments done.
Yeah, I could see potentially it would restrict the land application. It may cause the material potentially, I guess, depending on the nature of the PFAS, to be considered hazardous waste,
right?
Which then might limit it to certain management. And I don't recall if the new destruction technology includes incineration. There was some question about how many nines you needed to ensure an effective destruction.
Right. I see the next one. In regards to air, is there an estimated date on when PFAS would be considered a HAP or not? I have not heard an estimated date on that yet.
I think if I recollect, propyl bromide, normal propyl bromide, it took EPA a while to make that a HAP. So I imagine it may take them an equally long time, although I suppose it could be motivated. Would you happen to have a contact in?
I do,
okay.
yes. Yeah,
we
have actually been working a little bit with our air program on the metal finishing rulemaking. They've been kind of sitting on the sidelines and giving us advice where needed. So yes.
If you're willing to maybe talk about, talk to that person to see maybe they would be willing to share their perspective to our group.
Sure.
Maybe tell them that we're safe, we're friendly, we just want to learn. Sometimes it seems like I have a hard time selling our program, our group. We're just wanting to help. We want to be able to help the typically small businesses, but in Indiana, I mean, we don't really restrict. We're not going to, say, oh, you're not small, so I'm not going to help you. But learning, trying to learn, well, what's the state of the rule or the rulemaking or the interpretation. So yeah, it'd be very interesting to learn, as far as inclusion of additional PFAS as HAPs. And I don't know if that was going to be just limited at present just to PFOA and PFAS.
Right. I will speak to them and get back to you.
Okay, I appreciate
They'd be
that.
willing to talk.
So it's 2:58. I do want to thank you very much, Jodie, for being willing to kind of listen to me at the water conference. Consider my request to have you present today, and the time you've taken to put together the presentation and your presentation. I think it was very informative. I tried to take copious notes. I know we'll have the recording. I presume you might be able to make the presentation available to us as well.
Yes, I can probably do that. Yes.
Okay. Again, any other questions? I don't know if Leanne is on call. I don't think she is. I didn't see her. But I guess with that being said, I wish you all a good afternoon. And I believe, let's see, next month is going to be a talk involving a couple of people with the Office of OAQPS on subpart MMA and the automobile and light duty NESHAP, as well as a brief update on the air emissions reporting rule. So that will be August 15th. So I look forward to hearing it or being there for everyone then. Have a good afternoon. Take care.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you. Bye-bye.